And welcome back to the Hot Lab, where we're talking the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend, 5th to the 7th of April. We're excited. We're coming off the back of an interesting Australian Grand Prix. Many things to talk about. We're going to look at the track. We're going to look at every driver and their storyline going into the Japanese Grand Prix, as well as trying to predict that podium, as well as a few facts. However, one of the most important things is, when is the Japanese Grand Prix on? Well, for the UK people, the race is going to start at 6 o'clock. Qualifying goes live 7 till 8 o'clock in the morning. To the race on Sunday the 7th at 6. Saturday the 6th, qualifying 7 till 8. Practice 3 is 3:30 till 4:30 on the 6th. And then on the Friday, we've obviously got practice 1 at 3:30 till 4:30 in the early hours of the morning. Practice 2 at 0700 to 800, or 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning for practice 2, which is probably a slightly better hour to get up, although it is quite early. So unless you love F1 that much, which we do, or you got kids that get up early, you may want to give it a skip and just watch the highlights on YouTube. However, as promised, we are going to get into the Japanese Grand Prix preview. So let's get into the Japanese Grand Prix. And as you can see here, the most successful drivers: Schumacher on 6 wins, Hamilton on 4 wins, and Sebastian Vettel on 2 wins. But it's Schumacher on the 6 that absolutely loves this place. This has been the home of title deciders as well. Not the last Grand Prix, but Ferrari's first victory of a championship. Not first victory, obviously, for Michael Schumacher in 2000, going up against Mika Hakkinen. There was still one race left. And obviously, who can forget the 1998 Japanese Grand Prix when Michael Schumacher stalled? It was heartbreak for all, wasn't it? It was, absolute heartbreak for all. Well, here's the, if I show you here, it would give me 2 seconds. I'm going to get up Pirelli's preview for the Grand Prix, which is interesting. I mean, there we go. We're wearing the there's our tyres. There's the stress it's going to have. It, and to be fair, it is quite the stressful track for the tyres. I mean, Pirelli have given it for tyre stress 5 out of 5. Not much braking there. A really fast circuit through those turns. Lateral load is 5 out of 5, and the asphalt abrasion a 4. But they've got the C1, the C2, and the C3, which I think, off the top of my head, kind of like Silverstone, are the hardest in their range. Number of laps, though. Here we go. If you are interested, let's have a look at that. I'll just hide our Pirelli preview there. So we've got the number of laps. It's a 5.8 kilometre, 53 laps with 18 turns for the Japanese Grand Prix. So let's get into the track in two secs. So let's get into our track preview guide, shall we? Here we are then at Suzuka. And we're coming into, this used to be called the Triangle. This is the famous turn where Prost and Senna came together in 1989. Let's have another of that as we're in the Alpha Tauri. Yes, which essentially is Yuki Tsunoda's. Now, we need to get a good one coming out of this last chicane, because this is the most important straight if you want to overtake with the DRS all the way down. Now, you can overtake from the inside and you can overtake from the outside. Both is possible. It's more difficult maybe on the inside, because as you can see, it is, I mean, you hardly, you barely brake, if at all. It's so fast going into sweeping into those two turns, and you kind of brake maybe in the second turn. But here we go into the absolutely iconic, I was going to say Senna S's, but Suzuka S's. Now, the big thing about these Suzuka S's is if you mess one up early on, you're going to almost mess them all up. It's kind of like, thread, needle, etc. And here we go now. This is, I mean, it's so much faster than it used to be. You can almost go flat here. No real overtaking point at this point. You get Degner 1 and Degner 2. This is where some people do get it wrong. This is where we may well see a few crashes in practice and qualifying. Degner 1 and then at Degner 2. Notably, I think 98 or 99, Hakkinen went really wide in Degner 2 and, had a crash as well. A fairly big one to end his qualifying. Here, this was a favourite of a certain Japanese driver who I've completely forgot now. In the I think it was in the Sauber, wasn't he? So, I completely, I can't believe forgot I'm going to have to find that out later. But yeah, you can pass in the hairpin. But really, really important there, if I just drag us back a bit in the hairpin, you can probably see, obviously, it's just a game, but I really struggle to get on the power there. As you can see, I'm got a lot of wheel spin, but this is really, really important now to get a good one going into Spoon Corner. Now, if you remember, one particular year was for Sebastian Vettel versus Max Verstappen, as Vettel, I think, tried to go, I believe, on the inside, but he tried to overtake Max Verstappen into this corner, and it all went horribly wrong, along with his Ferrari championship as well. It was just going absolutely pear-shaped here. Now, it's really important to get a really good exit out of Spoon Corner, because then you're going to take all that speed going down to the straight to 130R, which used to be one of the scariest corners in Formula 1. Not so much now. Most cars, I think in qualifying, you can pretty much take it flat. I remember particularly in the 2005 race, Fernando Alonso going on the outside of Michael Schumacher, which almost seemed absolutely impossible at the time. Can you pass through here? Not really side by side. You need to be more than alongside them, I think. We have seen passes here with the help of Slipstream and obviously the power boost through ERS, and then a lot of the time people will brake nice and early ahead, maybe more early than they need to, just so they get a really good slingshot coming into the start-finish straight and go from there. I mean, absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favourite circuits. It's one of the drivers' favourite circuits. And speaking of those drivers, let's get into them now, driver by driver, shall we? So let's kind of start towards the back, and let's talk about Kevin Magnussen. No, not Nico Hulkenberg. This guy here, yes, Haas got double points, didn't they, at the Australian Grand Prix, which was a very good thing. Haas, I think, has despite obviously, despite their Japanese team boss, who is going to obviously love the fact that he's in Suzuka, they have done a very, let's say, he thinks disappointing, but I don't think anyone else thinks he's that disappointing, because Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg have done absolute gangbusters. I personally don't think you can ask for a better start to Haas compared to where they were at the beginning of the year, coming out of their launch. Even they, by their own admissions, figured, oh no, we're not going to do very well. And Nico Hulkenberg, probably the favourite out the two to basically go gangbusters in qualifying. He can out-qualify that. He puts that car where it should not be. So could Haas score points? Absolutely, I wouldn't be surprised. They might need a bit of luck, a few people going out, but so far they have more than exceeded expectations. Someone who hasn't exceeded expectations is this guy here. Rumours, yes, Daniel Ricciardo. Rumours that he's only got 2 races left, which I personally do not think that's going to happen. I think he's got way more than 2 races left. Are they going to do a Nick de Vries? I don't know. If you remember, everyone thought they're going to get rid of Alex Albon at Red Bull. They did at the end of the season, but more importantly, it was at the end of the season. Yes, I know Red Bull, I'm going to move my mouse, guys. I know Red Bull can be quite harsh. However, I think they're going to give Daniel Ricciardo the best chance, and to a certain degree, I think it's very much up to Daniel Ricciardo as to whether he's going to be successful or not. I still think the ball is very much in his court. However, one person that could put a stop to that is obviously his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda. He has done absolutely fantastic the last 2 races, coming now into his home in Japan. He embarrassed Ricciardo in Australia. Could Ricciardo do the same? I think it's fairly doubtful, but you never know. Maybe, he's got the bit between his teeth and he goes very, very fast. I hope so. I don't want him to destroy Yuki Tsunoda. I'd love them both to be up there fighting for points. But Ricciardo knows if he has a chance of surviving, he needs to almost destroy Yuki Tsunoda. But then Tsunoda knows if he wants that chance for that Red Bull seat, he needs to destroy Daniel Ricciardo. I've always said only one of these guys is going to survive the year, in my opinion. Now, someone who may not survive the year is this man. Yeah, Logan Sargent. The Williams team absolutely had zero faith in him, didn't they? Zero. It was very, very sad. Zero faith in Logan Sargent. Why? I hear you ask. Well, you probably don't need to know why, because they gave Alex Albon the car after Alex Albon crashed, which a lot of people thought was very unfair. I understand why James Vowles did it. I think it was unfair, but I imagine under pressure, I think a lot of us may well have done the same thing. So let's have a look at the culprit that is Alex Albon. Yeah, this guy here. I think Williams could do okay here. Bearing in mind though, they've come out and Williams has said they still only have 2 chassis for the race, which I think is kind of unacceptable if you ask me. Only 2 chassis for the race. So yeah, basically don't make a mistake or you're going to be out essentially. And if Alex Albon has another crash and they swap him for Logan Sargent, I personally don't think that's going to happen. They got a lot of bad press. Was it worth it? Well, Alex Albon at one point looked like he could finish in the points in Australia. I still think Williams will be there or thereabouts. I think they'll be faster than the Alpines, etc., which we'll be getting into right now. Yeah, the poor Alpines. So we've got Esteban Ocon. He is. I can't help but feel that Gasly, since he's come to Alpine, he's been showing him up. And that hasn't really stopped too much. Let's look at where they both finished. I mean, last year it was Ocon 9th though in Japan last year, and Gasly 10th, which wasn't bad at all. Both of them scored points. Will they score points for this Japanese Grand Prix? I don't know. They're going to need a bit of a crazy one. They're going to need a wet weather, one of those wet weather wonders where no one knows who's going to win, like Nürburgring 99, and more on the weather a bit later. It could be interesting. But in terms of Ocon and in terms of Gasly, I think just if one of them again just get out of Q1, that for me will be a success. Could they get points? Anything's possible because the grid, even though they're one of the slowest teams, is still fairly close, especially for people to have a mistake, especially if it's going to, if it's going to be wet. But moving from the disaster that is Alpine with the rumours that they may be up for sale, rumours that Andretti may take them, let's get into this team here. Lance Stroll for the Aston Martin team. Yeah, he's not done too bad. I think he was more impressive last year, but then the car was a lot better. But once again, I'm really sorry. Lance Stroll is holding the team back. I think ultimately, come the end of the year, just like last year, many years before that, he's going to cost the team points. Obviously, Lawrence Stroll, nepotism reigns supreme at Aston Martin. Is Lance Stroll a good driver? I think a lot of people in F1, just to keep that car in between the white lines, they've got to have some element of talent. Remember, Lance Stroll has got pole. He has finished podiums. However, I think there is you could probably, on both your hands, list better drivers that are, waiting in the wings that I don't want to say deserve, but would be better than Lance Stroll, for example, Aston Martin's own test driver. Yeah, much better. So, Fernando Alonso, he comes off the back of a slightly controversial penalty, whatever way you look at it, one way or another. Did he brake test George Russell? I don't know whether he brake tested George Russell. I definitely think he didn't mean for George Russell to go off. But the steward said, and what doesn't like is his telemetry. It was erratic telemetry. And I think that if Fernando Alonso hadn't driven like that, it's a fact whether you think it was down to his lack of talent or not. But George Russell would not have crashed. Fernando Alonso has, I believe, done it in the past. We saw it at Abu Dhabi last year with Lewis Hamilton. And we've seen it with David Coulthard at the Nürburgring in 2003. And I think it was Robert Dornbos in, 2004 maybe. But it was definitely with Robert Dornbos as well. Who was, I think, in the Minardi at Hungary, which we shared a video on whether Alonso was guilty or not. So he has got form for it. He does sometimes play very near the line. I think side by side in battles, I think he's quite fair. But when people are behind him, I think he's definitely one to watch. And the reason why I feel that he knew that what he did was wrong. Because then he suddenly pretended, and let's be fair, it was pretending, that there was a problem with his car. And that quickly went away afterwards, didn't it? But yeah, his team supported him, thinking it was a bad penalty. It's cost the team a few points. I predict, though, he's going to do quite well. He's going to do quite well in Japan. Now, one of the people that did very well in Japan, finishing on the podium, I believe, I'm just going to double check the result, but I do believe he out-qualified his teammate as well. Yeah, he started second in Japan. His first outing in Japan in Formula One, he out-qualified his more experienced teammate, a la Lando Norris. So I expect Piastri to do really well. And what's really interesting now is, yes, Piastri didn't quite have the race pace in Australia. You did have that switch, slightly controversial switcheroo, which, understandably, the Australian crowd booed at. But Lando Norris was faster. McLaren didn't want them to didn't want their team to race. They want to maximise their points, which is kind of like a shame. I'd much rather see people race. I secretly liked it when the team orders were banned, sort of. I mean, I think maybe they can just have like the first half of the year, unless there's a very good reason, no team orders or something. But then again, I don't know, who knows? I digress. Anyway, Oscar Piastri, I think he could do a solid race. I think he could beat Lando Norris. Bearing in mind, he's now a lot faster in the race. If he can look after those tyres, get a decent setup, out-qualify Lando, I think he could beat Lando Norris. I think that's going to be really interesting. And let's talk about Lando Norris, the nearly man, the man that hasn't yet won a Grand Prix, sadly. But he's more than capable of winning a Grand Prix. I think McLaren could do well here. If you remember how fast they were, for example, compared to Hamilton in Saudi Arabia at the beginning of that race, not the race, the beginning of the lap, in the very fast S-like things, and I think McLaren will do very well. They could even, I think, challenge Ferrari, who I believe are probably going to be the second fastest team. And on that note, here we are. There's Carlos Sainz, the Australian Grand Prix winner. He has so far doing his best to prove that Ferrari made a mistake getting rid of him. Now, whether they should have got rid of Leclerc or not signed Hamilton, but he is doing his absolute best on his Formula One CV to show everyone that he still has it. The smooth operator. Let's see how he does in Japan. Can he keep that momentum? Obviously, he beat Charles Leclerc in Bahrain. That wasn't really clear cut because Charles Leclerc did have quite a few issues, didn't he, with his brakes. However, he beat him in Australia, fair and square. Even Leclerc put his hands up and said, look, ultimately, Carlos Sainz was faster. I kind of thought in the race he might fade because of his, his recent appendicitis. So he was our man of the race. He was the man of the weekend, as far as I'm concerned. He did really, really well. So can he build on that momentum, come in and be the top Ferrari driver? I think he can be. I still think over the course of the season, Leclerc is the driver you want, and they made the right decision. However, I think Carlos Sainz he is capable of definitely proving us wrong. And that's why I think the pressure is also on Leclerc. I mean, you've had Carlos Sainz. He's come back. I don't want to say destroyed Leclerc, but, he beat him, didn't he? Yes, I think Ferrari indicated that they didn't want any team orders, but at the time, Sainz was in front anyway. And at no real time, and until they called the team orders, did it look like Leclerc was going to pass him. And Sainz had it under control. I mean, he even passed Verstappen on track. When was the last time that someone has legitimately, for the lead, passed Verstappen on track other than the first lap? I can't remember, which is obviously saying something. So I think the pressure is on Charles Leclerc to beat Carlos Sainz. He very much needs to do that. Otherwise, I think the murmurings of questions are going to become more than murmurings coming out of Japan, and it's a track they both know. So, George Russell, yes, everyone thinks, did he make that mistake? Should he have made that mistake? I think you got to blame. For me, I think you blame Alonso more than George Russell, because of what happened. But I do think both the Mercedes drivers, and in particular Mercedes, have something to prove come to Japan. But a lot of people think because of the way the corners are, because of the way they struggled in Saudi Arabia, it's going to be a big problem for Mercedes. And it may well be. If they haven't sorted that car out, they may well be falling behind Aston Martin, or fighting with Aston Martin for essentially the fourth best team, while it's Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren are going to be up there. And that could be a bit of, maybe a bit embarrassing. But I think, in a way, more pressure is on this guy, Lewis Hamilton. He's been out-qualified and outshone by George Russell. Yes, you can make an argument saying he has been faster in the race, but he hasn't overtaken him yet, has he? We had Bahrain. Yes, he set the car up for the race. Okay, that pace wasn't really there. Saudi Arabia. Yes, the safety car kind of, scuppered him, and then we had the engine failure, where he was, on par with George Russell when you look at his lap times. The problem seems to be qualifying now, whether that's because he just absolutely does a 180, goes crazy on those setups, and they're so far removed from George Russell, who it would appear has more normal setups, let's say, for want of a better word. There probably is one out there, and maybe Hamilton, by doing these extreme setups, is going to find something at some point to be really happy in the car. That's something I think Max Verstappen, albeit not extreme setups, found at Baku last year, when he found something with the car, and then Sergio Perez never beat him again. But I do feel that Hamilton is under more pressure than George Russell coming into the Japanese Grand Prix to have a good Grand Prix, and at the very least beat I think he needs to absolutely beat his teammate. So this guy here, Sergio Perez, okay, I don't think, well, I was going to say, I don't think he's under the same pressure as, for example, a Hamilton or Daniel Ricciardo. However, but with a capital B, the issue is here. The issue here is, last year he had an absolutely shocking result, didn't he? Where did he finish? He didn't finish. He had a DNF, didn't he? Yeah, so an absolutely shocking qualifying and shocking Japan. He needs to, I think, at minimum, stick it on the front row and finish second. Otherwise, people are going to continue asking questions of his very average qualifying Australian Grand Prix. His first 2 races were brilliant. He starts the season off really, really well, and then he just tapers off. I just hope he's not started tapering off already, which would not be a good look for Sergio Perez. So fingers crossed for Sergio Perez. I hope he has I hope for his sake he has a good qualifying and a good race. I think he needs to at least qualify in the top 2 rows, really, really second, behind Max Verstappen, who I think this man here is going to be the most dominant person in Japan. If you remember last time, coming off a loss for Red Bull in Singapore, they went to Japan and he got pole position very, very comfortably, let's say, and beat everyone by nearly 20 seconds. And I think he very much had it in hand. It was Norris ended up finishing second, Piastri third. So he's going to come in with something to prove. I think the team are going to come in with something to prove. They weren't beaten in Australia like they were in Singapore. However, they did have that failure, and people are talking that a lot of people have suggested that even without that failure, Ferrari would have won because they had really, really good tyre deg. And that's something that even Red Bull have kind of put their hands up to him and said, yeah, you're probably kind of right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly interesting. So getting into a few, let's just say facts. Obviously, we've got the track. It was first opened in 1962 as like a Honda test track. It's held 33 races so far. F1 visited it first in 1987. Now the lap record is held by Lewis Hamilton, a 1:30.983. That's in 2019. But the track record, I think qualifying that year, was 1:27.064. I think Sebastian Vettel. Michael Schumacher, as I mentioned, has had the first wins, but just one driver has had the Grand Slam of the track, and that's Sebastian Vettel. He's the only driver to record that Grand Slam at Suzuka, taking pole, leading every lap, and fastest lap. And that was on his way to winning the 2012 Japanese Grand Prix in the Red Bull. Now, 2 teams are tied for most wins at Suzuka, and it's not Red Bull and it's not McLaren. It's the old school here that reigns supreme at the moment, and that's Ferrari and McLaren are tied for most victories here with 7 apiece. However, Mercedes is, thanks to McLaren, is the most successful engine partner, with them winning 10 times. McLaren, Benetton, Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes are the 5 teams who've scored 1-2 finishes in Suzuka. Red Bull to be the most recent in 2022. Red Bull share the record for most 1-2 finishes at Suzuka, and they've recorded, I think, 3 from the top of my head. There you go. A few interesting stats. In terms of the smallest margin win, that was Gerhard Berger's victory at the 1991 Japanese Grand Prix. He won from a certain Michael Schumacher. No, he didn't. Who did win that? 1991. No, it was, I think, Ayrton Senna, just about 3/10. In 2002, I think it was Michael Schumacher that was the second closest by just over half a second. If you're, obviously, if you're interested in that kind of thing. So there's a few facts. Let's get into who we think is going to be finishing on that podium for the Japanese Grand Prix? Well, I'm kind of like Australia. We're playing it a bit safe, really. I mean, I think this guy here, Charles Leclerc, is going to finish third, but simply because I think this track, I feel, is going to suit the Red Bull absolutely. It's going to be one of the 3 or 4 strongest tracks for Red Bull, and maybe they'll get a look in if it's raining. Maybe they'll get a look in during qualifying, but I think the race pace for Red Bull is going to be too much. So I think second is going to be Sergio Perez, simply once again because that Red Bull is really, really fast. I don't think anyone is going to be able to get near it, assuming they get the setup right. They don't have an Australian moment. And obviously, Max Verstappen, we know, he's far superior to Sergio Perez. He's probably going to win. Now, if Sergio Perez beats him, that will be a massive, massive exclamation mark. But, yeah. So, in terms of the podium, it's going to be Charles Leclerc in third. That Ferrari not quite fast enough to catch that Red Bull, despite Leclerc's talent. Could he beat them to pole position? Possibly. Sergio Perez in second. If he doesn't start second, I think the race pace alone and the tyre, the tyre degradation they're going to have is really, really going to help him. And last but not least, Verstappen. He's definitely not finishing last unless he has a failure. He's definitely winning, in my opinion, the Japanese Grand Prix. Yeah, sorry if that makes anyone sad. It kind of makes me sad as well. But let's get into I just want to get into one of the last things that GP fans has got. Yes, it is the 1st of April. I don't think this is an April Fool's Day. I've seen a lot of them, haven't I? Signs that, Vettel signed for Mercedes, signed for Mercedes, Verstappen signed, a lot of people signing for Mercedes today. But the weather forecast, what is it going to look like during the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix? So as we know, the F1, sets its sight in Japan for the 4th round of that 2024 season. But the weather in Suzuka, they're suggesting it's going to throw a curveball into the mix, with recent forecasts suggesting a chance of rain throughout the weekend. Now, the practice sessions on Friday look set to be a mixed bag. Cloudy skies, 40% chance of precipitation. Temperatures are expected to be cool. Okay, chance of rain, 40%. Now, Saturday's final practice and qualifying could also be affected by rain. A similar chance, 40%. That also means 60% it's not going to rain. So slightly more than half that it's not going to rain. And once again, they like their 40% here. Chance of race date, 40%. Chance of race date, oh no, not 40, take it away. Promises to be the most dramatic with a 60% chance of rain forecast. The maximum temperature is expected to exceed 17 with the minimum of 12. This combination of potential rain and cool temperatures could significantly impact car performance and race strategy. If you remember that the Red Bull in cool temperatures, it was struggling to switch its tyres on, which is one of the reasons it's so good on its tyres, and that's why Ferrari come good. That's why we know Haas is very good in the rain. They were at the very least, although they are much better at looking after their tyres. So, weather forecast, rain, 60% chance for the race, 40% both on Friday and Saturday. It could be really interesting. If you remember the the Japanese Grand Prix in 22, Max Verstappen with that combination of him and the Red Bull absolutely dominated. I remember Lewis Hamilton doing quite well, but he just couldn't get, I'm not sure who it was, but he just couldn't get by someone because that Mercedes had no straight line speed. Somewhat sadly. But yeah. So if you made it to the end of our preview, thank you very much. Massive appreciate it. Subscribe. We would absolutely love that. If you just made it to the end, that's great. If you just watched it, that's good enough for us too. But if you subscribe and or comment or like, that's going to be the icing on the cake, the cherry on top for us. So stay tuned this week as we go into the Japanese Grand Prix with all the news. You will be reviewing the practice sessions, reviewing the qualifying sessions, and obviously having our race review as well after the race on the Sunday. Yeah, let me know what you think. What are your predictions? Let us know down below. That would be quite interesting, and we will speak to you soon. Thank you very much.